Hi, this is Rick Savitsky from Chartech. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use Power BI to analyze gross profit, the change in gross profit over time, and specifically break down that change into explainable by volume change versus gross margin percentage change. And we're going to see that the benefit we have of using Power BI is we can, instead of just looking at the aggregate, which I shared in part 1 of my video, is instead look at it in more detail by certain attributes like customers versus type of manufacturing. The purpose for the video is to demonstrate, let you see the power of actually interacting with the data so that you can make better decisions, so that you can actually improve the gross profit for what you're selling your customers, and enable your employees to really come to the table with suggestions based on data to back it up. That's the why. Ultimately, it increases the value of your business. So I'm going to begin by showing some graphs, static. I'm going to explain the math behind the calculations, and then I'm going to interact with Power BI. I'm going to show you how it works. So to begin, this graph is pulled from essentially the general ledger. We're looking at invoice level detail aggregated at the general ledger. So we have total revenue over time, in this case quarter, it could be month, it could be year, and also what was the gross profit. Really straightforward there. The blue line is the gross profit margin percentage. So those are all really simple calculations. The smaller bars on the graph, I'm going to make a graph bigger in a second, those are what we're really focusing on. But to get the big picture here, we're ultimately just doing mathematical calculations so that as the gross profit changes, again, was it because of a change in volume or a margin percentage or both? So this next graph is the same information, but we changed the scale so that we're focusing on, in blue, what was the change in gross profit dollars quarter by quarter. And then here's the real key. We are mathematically able to calculate, okay, of that, and because we know the gross margin percentage, the line, how much of that is really broken down into green based on the change in volume versus light blue, the change in the rate. So I'm not going to read this to you here. In the first case, we're calculating in green our change based on volume. And so you could literally, from the financials, take this period, this percentage, that percentage, and actually calculate the change. In this case, the change in light blue, change in gross profit based on the percentage, the rate change. We're getting a different number, graphing it on the graph. And then finally, if we subtract the two, we're able to get back to, as a check figure, back to our change. So you could pause, you could reread that, you could get out a napkin with your financials and literally prove that the math works out. The key is there's no particular number from the financials that we're going to get these two bars from. Okay, we need to calculate them. And that's what we're going to be doing here in Power BI. But the main idea in the prior videos, I showed this in the aggregate. The reason we're going to use Power BI here is we're going to look at the aggregate, but then we're going to start interacting with the data and see the distinction, kind of the slicing and the dicing, and how that impacts what we're actually able to understand from the results. So I'm going to change, I'm going to make the screen big in just a moment. To begin, we've got our graph here over time. I could change my time scale by just sliding these bars at the top. I'm going to keep it at 6 quarters. I like looking at least quarterly versus monthly. It can be a little too much of movement, but it's your prerogative. We could look at it kind of any way in Power BI. And we've got a number here, just the total gross profit over the time period, so 2 million. And what's really important and why we're going to use Power BI here are these other rectangles. And so, in short, the darker the green, the higher the gross profit margin percentage. The lighter the green, the less the profit percentage. The larger the rectangle, the larger the gross profit dollars. Okay, and we have there's three groups of rectangles. The first one here is A, B, and C customers. And we can see literally they're not all the same shade of green. So the A customers are less profitable on a margin percentage than the B's and the C's. We've got a bar, another set of rectangles. Those are actual customers, anonymized, but this is real data. And bottom left is a distinction between, in this case, the manufacturer is a pure manufacturer, and they also do a little bit of value-added distribution. And so there's a distinction there in the margin. So the idea is not just to save this as a PDF and send it around, but rather everybody on your team to be able to interact with this directly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this larger, and I'm going to start clicking on things. To begin, if I click on manufactured, what happens is the amount changes. So I'm looking at 1.7 million of the 2. I can visually see the size of the rectangle. It's the bulk of the profit, gross profit over that period. But more importantly, the graph on the side is changing. Okay? And specifically, we're able to see in first quarter what percentage of the increase in gross profit dollars, and then was it because of a change in volume or a change in the rate? Okay, and then what percentage was that essentially of the overall change? So I click, I'm looking at manufacturing only. I unclick, I'm looking at the aggregate. Okay, so these changes in the bars and the bar length help me see, well, what impact is it by clicking on or filtering just for that segment? And you can see it's a pretty dramatic change of the overall aggregate. If I click on distributed parts, the line is dropping because it's lower margin percentage, and we see some pretty interesting, I think, information being depicted in the graphs here. So overall, in the second quarter, 2024, gross profit dollars went up. But when you take distributed parts only, they dropped. Okay, so a pretty dramatic impact by simply clicking and declicking, unclicking, clicking. Similarly, looking at the third quarter, 2024, it was the opposite. Overall, the business dropped in gross profit, but coincidentally here, the amount that went up based on the margin generated by the distributed parts increased. And then the real key here is these two numbers, again, are being calculated based on the change in the volume versus the change in the rate. And we see it's almost equal, a little bit more based on volume versus a change in the rate. Again, we can see the slope of the line, again, is helping guide us and validate what we're seeing on the bars. So I'm going to pause for just a second here. And one of the things that Power BI lets us do is validate, is this making sense? And then furthermore, I'm not going to do it right now, but drilling into the detail. I'll show you a little bit later on, but I can basically on any element say, well, show me more, and then I can see the actual detail that makes up particular parts, jobs, etc., projects for whatever it is I'm clicking on. And that's really where we have the power to drill all the way down into the detail, and I'll show you that in a second. So I'm going to make this larger again, and if I instead change my focus here, now looking at my A's versus B's versus C's, you can see as I'm clicking through, the graphs are changing pretty dramatically. Okay. Again, A's are making up roughly 50%. I can see from the size of the rectangle here, it's about half of the total, and the numbers are validating that. But if I click on that, I can see, well, how much is there an impact overall for the business and the change in gross profit based on just looking at the A customers? And again, how much is it because of volume? How much is it because of a rate change? I can further go all the way down into an individual customer. And here's something interesting in the data. So for the 6 quarters, the number one customer, look over here in the fourth quarter, notice the bulk of the reason that there was a drop in the company's performance and gross profit for that entire quarter was literally, we can see visually here, made up essentially of one major customer. That drop, and it was primarily because of volume, and then a little bit also, or added to it, was the drop in the margin here, this percentage, which is again a pretty steep drop from the slope. But one customer was able to explain in one quarter at least the change. I can drill into the detail here, look at the customer summary, and very briefly, I'm just going to narrate here. We can see all the individual parts, each part contribution of gross profit dollars, and then the shaded, the darker the green, the more profitable from a percentage standpoint. There's a lot of information on this screen on purpose, information about quoting and estimating and AR and other things, but the key thing I wanted to emphasize there is we can drill down into the detail. And so the action item for your team would be, okay, understand customer by customer, even making a distinction on what type of product we're selling. This is simple with just two distinctions here, but for your business, it may be by product line. It could be by work center, really anything that's really relevant to, well, how can you, one way or the other, measure and then tie it back to an individual sale of an item, something you're manufacturing for your customer. That's a really good candidate then for another way of, again, slicing and dicing the data so that ultimately you can make incremental improvements. And that's the primary point here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We could do a lot more interaction. There's a lot of interesting things in that data, but the question is for your business, what's the most relevant? And can you enable your team to interact with your data, come to you with recommendations, and I believe Power BI enables you to do that. So if this is of interest, please reach out. We'd love to talk to you. We love helping manufacturers be more profitable by using their data and enabling their teams. Please pass this on, share this video with somebody else you think would benefit. Please fill out our web request form, give this video a like. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks a lot. Bye.